Hello and welcome to LitUp 2021. My name is Haley Lefholz. I'm a youth services librarian with Mid-Continent Public Library, and I'm going to help today with moderating our interview with Linda Holmes. I'm going to give some quick introductions before I turn things over to today's teen moderator. Linda Holmes is a pop culture correspondent for NPR and the host of Pop Culture Happy Hour. She began her professional life as an attorney. In time, however, her affection for writing, popular culture, and the online universe eclipsed her legal ambitions. She shoved her law degree in the back of the closet, gave its living room space to DVD sets of The Wire, and never looked back. Holmes was a writer and editor at Television Without Pity, where she recapped several hundred hours of programming, including both High School Musical movies, for which she did not receive hazard pay. Her first novel, Evvie Drake Starts Over, was published in the summer of 2019. Interviewing Linda Holmes today is Neha Streeter, a senior at Olathe North High School. Neha has been a volunteer with LitUp for the past 3 years. She also volunteers as an editor for the Johnson County Library's literary magazine, Elementia, and has had several poems and essays published in literary magazines and online. Though she adores everything fiction, she's also passionate about journalism and is constantly attempting to turn her friends into NPR fanatics. Neha, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Haley. It's so good to see you. It's especially great to see Linda today. I'm really excited for this. I listen to Pop Culture Happy Hour like every day. My friends are really into it too, and it's just lovely to meet you.
Of course, it's lovely to meet you too. Thanks for doing this.
How are you today? How was your day, I guess?
I'm doing okay. As we tape this, I am a couple weeks past my first vaccine shot. So I'm hopefully in that process of being able to leave my house a little bit more. As I mentioned earlier, if you hear any barking, it just means my dog hears a lawnmower outside downstairs, but hopefully he'll be fine. But yes, I'm well. I'm happy to be doing this.
It's so great. Yeah, no worries at all. Your dog is adorable. I see you post on Twitter sometimes. He seems so happy.
Yeah, this is why I introduce him to the internet, so that if he makes noise, people are prepared for it.
Yeah, he's his own personality, I think.
He really, he's a attention hog.
So to get started, I'd love to hear about how you got from your law degree to here where you are today, writing novels too, and just how did you go from going to law school and then, I don't know, just changing your mind maybe, or having a new passion?
Yeah. When I got out of law school, I got a job as a legislative lawyer. I was a nonpartisan research staff in the Minnesota State House. So I did that for a while. I also had an appellate law job for a while. So I was writing briefs and doing oral argument and things. But I started freelancing, just just TV recap freelancing for Television Without Pity, which had been a site that I read and loved. And it was just a very small thing at first. I was just doing little TV recaps, and gradually over time, I started doing a little bit more of that for different outlets and for places like MSNBC. And, I did a little bit of writing for TV Guide, and I kind of did more and more of that. And then I got a chance to move to New York and kind of write and edit full time in the entertainment writing space, as we might say. And then when it came time for me to leave that job, they were interested in hiring somebody at NPR to do some pop culture coverage. And that's kind of how I wound up being there.
So did you start all the pop culture stuff at NPR? Is that your birth child or brainchild?
In some ways, I definitely was. I think I was the first person whose official job at NPR had to do with pop culture. Now, there were people at NPR and throughout the public radio system who were trying to increase the pop culture kind of presence of public radio and public media and the kind of coverage that they were offering. But yeah, I think I did some work in the company to kind of have more of an official space for pop culture coverage. And I did develop their pop culture blog, which was kind of folded into the rest of the site a while ago. I still do the writing, but a lot of places, they don't really have things separated as much into blogs anymore. And I did co-found the podcast. So yeah, I did some things. I think there are always lots of people involved in getting things started.
That's still really cool. I love to hear that, like, you had that kind of role, founding role, and you had to like really work for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun to start things. It can, it can be challenging, and obviously anything
Were
that
there a lot of difficulties when you started working on that?
I think there were people, obviously NPR, particularly their interest in arts has always been really kind of, they try to be really conscious of not just covering kind of commercial entertainment and things like that. So I think there was a concern from some people. They wanted to make sure that it wasn't just like, this is going to be somebody who's going to give us a lot of coverage of, celebrity weddings and stuff like that. And I think in some ways it took some time to kind of build up the trust in the building that I was on board with kind of the general public service mission of the company, and saw that as part of what I wanted to do. So there were definitely some challenges, but for the most part, it's been a really lovely place to work for me.
How was the public reception like when you first started out and started having to like go out and get that kind of art feature and build up?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was, the NPR audience is, is changing a lot. And I think that some of the traditional audience wanted to make sure, again, that they weren't going to lose the coverage that they thought was most important, because there were people who, again, came to NPR because they didn't want their kind of culture and arts coverage to be dominated by just large commercial properties and just like, here's a big popular thing. And again, I think as with inside the building, I think with the traditional kind of NPR audience, I think it took some time to make people comfortable that it was still NPR, it was still a public media project, and I still felt the the same obligations of the mission and the public service idea that everybody else did. And then, there was sort of a different audience that I think came to public media and public radio through more pop culture coverage. I think that still happens, and that's obviously a really lovely thing, because there's plenty in public media to enjoy for a lot of different audiences.
Yeah, what would you say is a traditional audience versus like, have you seen it change and grow and sort of impact?
I mean, I don't think it's a secret that demographically the NPR audience has been pretty white and older. That's kind of and I think I try not to overstate that, because I do think it's important to keep in mind, like I always hear public radio when I'm like in cabs and things like that. Like there has always been a segment of the NPR audience that's really kind of diverse and fascinating to me. But in terms of the bulk of the audience, the company has certainly been working very hard to try to make that audience more diverse, which has to do with like making the content more diverse and interesting and exciting to a broader audience. And so I think, have I seen it change to some degree? Yeah. I mean, it's slow going, right? It's slow going in some ways to shift audience demographics, and it's been slow going at the company to change the personnel who work in public radio. I think for us, that's been true. For a lot of local stations, it's been true. But I think there have certainly been projects that have given me a lot of hope for what we can do, but it's really a matter of keeping everybody really super focused on that goal. And I think that's what they're trying to do right now, because everybody knows that it's both a kind of a moral imperative and also a kind of a business and survival imperative that you continue to make the audience bigger and more engaged and younger, probably.
Yeah, I guess there is a balance right there to get that kind of the business side of it as well as the moral side of it.
And I mean, in this case, to me, they go hand in hand, right? There's fortunately, the good thing is it's not a conflict, right? It's both good business and good ethics to make content that, and people hate the word content, but I kind of like it for public radio because it involves a lot of video.
I'm just curious, like, why do you think people don't like it?
I think a lot of people think the word content sounds jargony,
Oh, yeah.
as opposed to, writing or radio or whatever. But I think in the case of NPR, there's obviously a lot of audio. I do a lot of writing. There's also increasingly a lot of video content. If you think about things like the Tiny Desk concerts out of music.
Yeah,
I mean, they're the best, right?
Yeah.
And so NPR is a lot more than not just that it's more than audio, but that's more than radio, but it's more than just audio. So I think, it's both good business and it's the right thing to do in terms of the mission to make the content that NPR is putting out more, more relevant to a larger group of people. And so I think one of the good things is it kind of gets everybody a little bit on the same page in terms of, your other choice is sync, so it's good to do. And I think also is very helpful to the company.
Oh yeah, I get that. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, like going back to your career itself and like sort of like what you do at NPR. Like, do you have a favorite thing that you kind of in that kind of content area and that kind of multimedia aspect that like you really focus on, that really drives you, that motivates you?
I always like. It sounds weird because in some ways the Oscars are not. The Oscars are not a meritocracy by any means. They have an ugly history of being exclusionary in certain ways. But I do find that the Oscars in some ways are a really fun time to talk about different kinds of films. And if you think about them in the right way, they can help surface documentaries and international films and animated films and things like that people maybe haven't seen. So I kind of like the opportunity to work in a lot of different, I usually do some writing around the Oscars. I do some audio. Some of it's kind of late night after the ceremony. I was working the Oscars the night that the La La Land Moonlight thing happened, and we all sort of suddenly had to scrap what we were doing because we thought it was going one way and then it went another way, and that was very exciting. So I do kind of enjoy the Oscars. I would also say, like, every once in a while something comes along that just really surprises me. We did a pair of episodes recently about the Muppets, and we got thousands we put up a poll of like who were the best Muppets. We got thousands of responses and people gave us all kinds of really interesting like answers, and our producer Jessica sorted through them, and it was really as engaged as I thought people were going to be in discussing the Muppets. They were more engaged than I thought. It was really awesome. And I love those things where we got a chance to do an audience interaction component. We got a chance to do some writing because we had a web build where we talked about the ones that the audience put in the top 25. We did some.
Did you get any like fun anecdotes from people about the Muppets themselves?
We got a lot of, what we did get was a lot of people who would name like super obscure Muppets that maybe like I had never heard of. I mean, some of those people were just like being cute. They would name like a Muppet that was in one sketch in 1982 or something. But there were ones where it would be like, oh yeah, this would be someone's favorite Muppet. Like someone's favorite Muppet is the third chicken from the left who, was on with Gonzo. And it was interesting to me to see how people saw those things play out. And generationally, we talked a little bit about the fact that for some people, their touchstone with the Muppets is clearly mostly Sesame Street. For some people, it's clearly the Muppet Show. And for some people, it's clearly the movies that came a little bit later, like Muppet Treasure Island and Muppet Christmas Carol. And so you would get different answers kind of depending on what slice of the audience you were talking to. It was actually super interesting to me.
That sounds very cool. Yeah, it sounds like you'd have a lot of statistics on like what Muppet media people consume.
It was really like there were ones that came in higher and lower than I expected. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that my touch point tends to be the Muppet Show just because of the age that I am.
What is your favorite Muppet? I mean, you probably said on the show.
So my favorite, the Muppet that I picked was Animal. Animal is, I just think, the most Muppety Muppet.
What's like the Muppety Muppet?
Well, he's like he's all id, right? He's just like, he just kind of mostly moans and plays the drums. That's sort of, I just think he's got this really funny giant mouth and big eyebrows that go up and down. He just has a lot of like very hot Muppet energy, I think.
I love that phrase. I'm going to start using that.
Yeah, it's all yours.
Okay, yeah. So that was your favorite episode that you did recently with PCHH.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite episode maybe over the years, or actually going back to maybe the award ceremony? I know recently you did a coverage of the Golden Globes, and this year it's been kind of controversial.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, like maybe could you compare the award ceremonies you've covered and like maybe like an anecdote or something about how they work or?
Sure. We have sort of over time built a process for covering award ceremonies where we all kind of pitch in and work overnight to get a show out overnight. So there used to be I obviously haven't been in the office in over a year. We've all been working and recording from home, but at my producer's desk, she used to have a whiteboard that would have it would have the times that she left on the nights that she had to cut those episodes and publish them after we were done, which would be after the show had ended. So there used to be a whiteboard that would say, 5:15 a.m., 4:30 a.m., and it would name like whether it was the Golden Globes or the Oscars or the Grammys or whatever. And I think that kind of like, this was not the reason why she did it. She did it to kind of keep track for herself of what kind of hours she was keeping when she was at that time also producing the show basically by herself, but which thankfully is not the case anymore. But for me, it was always really helpful to be reminded. It was just one example of being reminded of how much work there is, that you do some of it as the host of the show, but or a host of the show, but other people do a lot of it when you're not there. And I never had to stay until 5:30 in the morning because I wasn't the producer. I would tape the show and then I would get to go home. And she would stay until 4:30, 5:15. And I think in some ways seeing those times was a good thing for all of us.
Yeah, that makes sense. It sounds really, I don't know, it sounds really tough to put out an episode that fast. Do you know like how a typical episode would run comparatively or?
I think it depends on the episode. And I think it also has depended on the time in the history of the show, because we used to, originally the show aired once a week. The episodes were roughly, they were roughly 43 minutes, probably 43 minutes long, 45 minutes. And like I said, once a week. Then we went to twice a week and they were essentially half as long because it was the same amount of stuff divided into 2 episodes. And now we have 5 a week. So it probably, the format of the show has changed somewhat, but I think the schedule in general, there's a good amount of time that goes into the booking of the guests, right? Because I don't do that. I don't have to call people and set up the time and the scheduling and everything. The guests have to get booked. The script has to get and the comments are unscripted, but the top and the bottom is scripted, right? Where I kind of give like an introduction. And the script also will have a lot of stuff that the producers put in there for us about kind of background information. NPR is really good at getting pronouncers so that that you're pronouncing people's names correctly. And they prioritize that, and the producers do a lot of work with that. When we have taped the show, they then, some of it is basic cutting, cutting the beginning and the end and making sure that it all kind of goes together. But there's also a tremendous amount of, cutting out kind of conversational tangents that don't go anywhere. They do a lot of cleaning up, stumbles so that you can always take a breath and start your sentence over again if you get kind of tongue-tied. So cutting the show is a big job. They have to do a fair amount of work with levels and stuff. Like, for example, if you have 4 people who are in different houses recording on different recorders, then when you get all their sound together, it's not all going to be the same volume. That has to be all leveled out by someone. And depending on how it was recorded, sometimes somebody, like if you laugh, it'll be super loud and someone has to kind of like pull that laugh down so it doesn't redline quite as much. So there's a real combination of kind of editorial judgment things and tech things and logistical things that producers do. So it takes, many hours of work to keep this show going. And we now have several producers working on the show. So.
What's it like to be in I guess now it's online, but even in the room or just like be on the calls with people and like, you guys on the podcast have such like a nice camaraderie. Like, did it take a while to build that up and sort of get to that point?
I mean, the good thing about it was we all pretty much knew each other when we started the show, right? And the good thing about that was that we had a kind of a natural energy. We were acquainted, we were friends. The bad part of that, of course, is that then your show is only as diverse as your group of friends. And most people's groups of friends or work acquaintances are not as diverse as you would hope. So the sort of blessing and the curse was that we had established relationships. And so it wasn't very difficult to build the camaraderie, and it wasn't very difficult to build the chemistry. What's been wonderful has been over the years being able to add more people, and really kind of, in some cases, really reduce our own roles on the show to amplify a lot more different voices. I love being in that room. I will tell you, as we taped a show this morning about Legally Blonde, and I was in this conversation with people who were significantly younger than me, who had really different kind of cultural, introductions to Legally Blonde, because when Legally Blonde came out, I was out of law school, and some of them were like in middle school or younger. So I love those conversations because I always learn something, and I always see things differently when I've heard like a bunch of really smart people talk about that.
Are you allowed to tell us anything about the conversation this morning with Legally Blonde?
I will just say, I think we talked a lot about things that we loved about the character of Elle Woods and Reese Witherspoon, and the way that she's a really interesting character who kind of challenges ideas about who's a serious woman. We also talked about it as an incredibly white movie, set in not just an incredibly white sorority that she belongs to, but also the idea that Harvard Law was so white, which in reality, would not have been quite the case. So we talked about sort of the pluses and the minuses, and with these kind of nostalgic conversations, that's often where we wind up. We wind up having a combination of kind of, here's where it warms your heart, and here's where, in retrospect, you see what you would respond to differently if a thing came out today. And it doesn't mean that you don't still have a lot of fondness or affection for it, but you have to kind of develop that muscle of seeing what its limitations are.
I remember with your Friends episode, actually, that was one of my favorite parts of that episode, where you kind of took a look at the really negative aspects of it being made so long ago and not having the same standards that we would have today. And just, I love having that balance on your podcast.
Yeah, I think there's almost no point in doing a piece about something that you're kind of nostalgic about, like we did with Friends or Legally Blonde, if you're not going to address kind of the distance between who you are now in terms of your critical eye and who you maybe were then.
Would you say your own critical eye has shifted over the course of working?
For sure. I mean, in the sense that, like, when I watched Friends, was I really super bothered by the fact that it was so much of it ran on like weird gay panic jokes? Like, that didn't bother me that much at the time. And it's not because I didn't care theoretically. It's just because I wasn't paying attention to it, and I didn't really, wasn't conscious of what that was doing. And it just was not really that much on my radar. And now if you put a show in front of me that, had just those kind of constant kind of, two guys being like, but we're not kissing, like, it just wouldn't strike me the same way. There are certain things that I think you can kind of go back and be more forgiving of than others. But it's always an interesting thing to go back and be like, how much can I kind of relate to where I was then with my perception of things.
When you look at a show critically and to kind of think about it in terms of like reviewing it for a podcast or just talking about it, is there like things that like you look at specifically, or maybe like a checklist, or how do you take notes? Maybe how do you think about the show?
I will usually try to work from a kind of, I'll try to get a sort of a general sense of, I pay attention both to things that I can kind of notice technically, right? Like, how's the pacing of it? How's how interesting is the editing and the cinematography and stuff like that? How much can I notice what's kind of the visual palette, right? Is it everything kind of gray? Is everything kind of bluish? Are they using, weather? Are they using kind of overcast weather as a way to signal sadness or something like that? Like those kinds of filmmaking things. But I do try to pay attention also to some of the things that are just more as a viewer, and you notice particular things. Like I can't not give a show credit if I gobble up all the episodes of it, even if I'm not sure I think it's that good. I try to tell people like, look, I may not have admired this show, but I got very sucked into it and I finished it all really fast. And like, what can you say? Right. I did that with Bridgerton. I think I watched it in one day. I didn't necessarily think that was a great show, but I could not stop watching it. And that's one of the things that it's meant to do. So you can't kind of not give them credit for that. So
is there a thing that you can kind of pinpoint with like why shows like Bridgerton, or like I remember you did an episode of Indian matchmaking. I watched that too because I'm Indian.
Yeah.
It was just like it was like interesting to see, because these aren't shows that you would think of as critically beautiful maybe, but like they are still very captivating.
I wish I knew. I think it's sort of I think it's the project of a lot of critics' work to try to identify the difference between what is good and what is your taste, right? There are certain things, and one of the ways that Glenn, who's on our show, tends to say this is he'll say this show is not for Glenn's, and it just means like this is not the kind of thing I like. And no matter how well they made it and how well they executed it and how talented everyone was, it's not my thing, right? And that happens with a lot of like high fantasy and things like that for me. Like I'm not really a Lord of the Rings person, and it has nothing to do with how good Lord of the Rings is or isn't, right? It's just not for Linda's. And so one of the things that I always try to do is if it is something like Bridgerton, I think, can I identify things that I actually think are working really well about, for example, with Bridgerton, the pacing, the way that they are building, particularly in the era of Netflix, there's this idea of building the end of the episode so that you have to push forward to the next one, particularly because they want you to sit there and kind of
the cliffhanger situation, or
well, sort of, but it's like, did you read The Hunger Games?
Yeah.
So the thing about The Hunger Games, one of the things about The Hunger Games is that she's extraordinarily good at making the end of a chapter, like something right at the end of the chapter, it goes boom. And then you have to read the next chapter because she leaves a little thing at the end of the chapter that you can't leave it there. And I think a lot of times they try to do that on Netflix so that you will just go with it because that little thing comes up that says, want to watch the next one. And all they really have to do is provide you with something that pushes you over to be like, okay, I want to know. I want to watch one more. And so I try to figure out, like, is it just that this is my kind of thing? Or is there something I can identify that I can talk about in a useful way where, I'm invested in the fact that I want to see what's happening in this or that relationship? Versus, is it a thing where there are certain shows that I've watched where it's been like, I'm really just waiting because I want to know if anything interesting is ever going to happen. And you get to the end and you say, oh, it actually didn't. And now I feel like a chump because I watched the whole thing. So I do try to be inquisitive about those kinds of binge experiences, but it's complicated because you have to figure out how to separate out, again, your taste from what's good.
What is your taste, actually? Do you have like your own biases? I know from your Hallmark episode a couple of months ago, you really got into like talking about Hallmark movies, and like they have a reputation for being kind of cheesy, but they're still really fun to watch.
Sure. And I mean, the thing about me and Hallmark movies and those, that I would say that kind of category of like that category of romance movie is that I don't watch them all the time. Right. I typically will kind of not watch very many until the Christmas season. And that's very specifically a thing that I do during the Christmas season. And sometimes like for a couple weeks in the summer, if they're doing some summer thing. But, I do like romantic comedies. Interestingly enough, I like a lot of action movies. Depending on like, I don't like them to be super... I mean, I could say I don't like them to be super violent, but then there are exceptions to that too. Like I like John Wick more than people ever expect that I will. But I love Die Hard, and I love a lot of the stuff that came out of like Die Hard on a plane, Die Hard on a boat, et cetera, et cetera. And I like sort of cop thrillers. stuff like Inside Man, which Denzel Washington is in. It's a really good movie. But I love it when I'm surprised. I watched Panic Room recently, which is a David Fincher movie that Jodie Foster was in, and Kristen Stewart when she was like a little thing.
Oh.
Yeah, she was like a tween, and she played Jodie Foster's daughter. And they're in this house, and these guys break in, and so it becomes like the mom and the daughter locked in the panic room. The guys out there, the burglars, scary burglars. It's a standoff. I loved that movie. And for some reason, I just never watched it. And so I love it when I'm surprised and when I'm just sort of like, flicking through, iTunes or Netflix or whatever. And I find my way to something that I think, oh, I never watched that. I might like that. Like I love to be surprised. And that's the problem with some of those algorithms on Netflix or Amazon. They'll give you a thing like the thing you already watched and liked. So it's a little harder to be surprised.
Going back to, like, you said you like rom-coms, and I know you have a book out, Evvie Drake Starts Over, and I'd love to hear about also that aspect of your life, because I know journalism and writing a novel is like really pretty, like, wildly different forms of writing styles. I'm sure it has like some layover, but it feels a little bit kind of different. I'm just curious to hear about how you got into that point of rom-com writing.
I wanted to write novels. I wanted to write fiction when I was a little kid, right? I wanted to write fiction much before I wanted to be a TV critic or anything like that. And in fact, when people asked me when the book first came out, people would say, did you always want to write fiction? And my answer was, didn't everybody want to write fiction when they were a little kid? Because everybody read, most people read books, read a certain amount of fiction when they were young, or had fiction read to them. Most people. Didn't everybody want to write books? Come to find out, not everybody wanted to write books, but I did, even then. But the course of being a high school student who was kind of insecure about a lot of things, and then a college student who was kind of insecure about a lot of things, I wound up kind of putting it down and not doing it for a long time. And then, but I would every once in a while, I would have something going, in my laptop. I would have 5 pages or something, or 10 pages or something. And the story that became Evvie was just something that I just kept picking up over and over again until it kind of got far enough along that I sought out, I tried to figure out how to kind of get the energy going to finish it. And then I finished it, and then I found an agent, and, I was very lucky. I had a relatively simple publishing experience, in all honesty.
Oh, that's so great. I loved, I haven't read the book myself, but just doing like research on it and just kind of looking into it, it seems so fascinating to me, because I think the thing that stood out to me is the way that you dealt with trauma in the book. And I feel like I read a lot of books with physical trauma, or like more of that kind of bold and brash kind of style of it. And I just don't see a lot of that more emotional abuse side of things. I'm just really curious to see how you dealt with that in the book.
When the original idea for the book, in some ways, was the idea of the kind of complicated grief of having someone die who has hurt you. And originally, I was thinking about a woman whose husband died, who had been physically abusive to her. That was my original kind of idea for the book. But I felt, honestly, like it felt like too much to take on as a first book when that's not my own experience. And it felt like an extra step of unfamiliarity from, I haven't had emotionally abusive relationships, but I have had sort of negative emotional interactions with people. And it felt like something I was closer to being able to wrap my arms around. So yeah, and I did feel, I think, like I wanted her to be, I wanted her to feel somewhat guilty about her failure to grieve in the way people expect her to. And I wasn't sure that it was as believable to me that if she had been physically abused, that she would feel that guilt. Although I'm sure there are people out there who would say, yes, she still would have. But I felt like because it was emotional, she didn't have things to point to say, this is what happened. I went to the hospital. I had bruises. I had broken ribs. Because it wasn't things that left physical marks. It was more, that was what I wanted to explore, was because it didn't leave physical evidence, that she struggled with the idea of, was it wrong that she was kind of relieved to be out of that marriage, regardless of the fact that she certainly had not wanted her husband to die.
That's a really complex thing to tackle. And I from what I've heard, at least, it seems that you did it really well. And it seems that it's very like well balanced. Did you have to do any maybe research or interviews or sort of going into that sort of topic?
I didn't do interviews. I did do some reading and research about a variety of things. Some of it was about emotional abuse. Some of it was about grief. And some of it was about kind of more less loaded things like baseball and Maine and things like that, other things that are part of the book. But I did do some research and reading about emotional trauma and kind of how people tend to think about those sorts of relationships.
Also, when you were writing the book, maybe like I heard that you did a lot of sort of like inspiration from your own life. I've heard that in the main house in the book, isn't that your summer house from when you were younger too? Like, how is it to incorporate those aspects of yourself into the book and kind of write for yourself, especially?
Yeah, it's based, the area, the town that the book takes place in is fictional, but it's based on a part of Maine that my family used to go to in the summer when I was young. And there is a house in it that is closely based on a house that we really went to, that really exists. I loved doing that. And I think it's very, I have very warm feelings about that place. And I actually went up there and spent some time there while I was writing, to kind of get it back in my, to kind of get the smell of the air back in my nose or whatever. And I think, I love places, and I love books where you can kind of imagine the place. And it's an idealized, I think, version of a small town. I would cop to that, but it's the kind of book that I like. And my guiding principle with this book was really that the most reliable thing that I had to go by was I wanted to write a book that I would like and want to read.
So I've heard also just from online that you're writing something new. Could you tell us a bit about that, or is that something that's secret?
I don't want to say too much about it. It's not a sequel. It's an interesting thing. Writing a second book is really hard, and you can hear people say that writing a second novel is really hard, and then you get there and it seems like, well, it doesn't seem like it would be that hard. When you've written the first one, it's like, I could do that again and write another one. But particularly, I think, if you feel like the first book did well or did better than you expected, it's very easy to get caught up in this cycle of kind of pressuring yourself to figure out like, what should I do for this book? Should I make it a lot like that book, or a lot different from that book? Or do I have to prove that I can write a lot of different kinds of, that cycle is really complicated. And there are a lot of people who can speak to the kind of the sophomore book issue. It's kind of a classic, I think.
Did Evvie exceed your expectations, actually? Did you see a sort of a rise in that book that you didn't expect to see?
Yeah, I did not. When I was finishing that book, my feeling about that book was, I just want to finish it. I don't know if anybody's ever going to publish it. I don't know if anybody's ever going to read it. I had my expectations for that book were, as I said, I'd wanted to write a novel since I was a child, and I'd never finished one. And so I wanted to finish it. And that was what my expectation was. And I published it, and, I was fortunate enough to have really good support for it from the publisher, which not everybody gets. And I was lucky in that regard. And it did well. And it absolutely, it greatly exceeded my expectations. Yeah.
So looking back at sort of doing the book and doing the Pop Culture Happy Hour podcast too, is there anything specific in maybe like writing and sort of reviewing and just consuming sort of literary things and movies and all of that kind of stands out to you? Is that sort of a passion you've always had, something you've always been inquisitive about, or have you had other things that sort of have conflicted with that maybe?
You mean in terms of things I wanted to do with my life?
Yeah, sure. Just I don't know, because I feel like some people have like conflicting interests. I'm just curious to see if you had like, because I know you went to law school and maybe that was just kind of, yeah.
Yeah, I sure did. I did have a lot of interests, but I think some of the reasons I had a lot of interests were that it was really hard for me to commit to pursuing the things that I really cared about. Because like I said, I was not a particularly confident person. And so in a way, I didn't want to be overshooting what I considered to be my abilities. So I would look for things that I had a lot of evidence that I was good at. So I was good at math. So I took a bunch of math in college, even though I really didn't care about math at all. But I was good at it, right? I got good grades in math. I got a good SAT score, so I continued taking math. I did like studying law. Law was a little bit different. I did like studying law, and I liked writing about law. I didn't particularly love practicing law, but again, I had evidence that I was good at it. So I continued to kind of chase it. And the thing about creative work, like writing novels or something like that, is that you don't necessarily have a lot of evidence that you're good at it unless you have actually published a book or won a contest or something like that. It's hard to tell whether you're any good at it. And so when I was sending the manuscript of Evvie to people for them to read, my friends and the first couple of people who read it, I would write it, I would send it, and it would have an email with it that said, "This might be terrible." And it was just because I didn't feel like I had anything to go by. I didn't feel like I had any signs, and I liked the fact that with college I had grades, and with law school I had grades, and with jobs I had performance reviews and things like that. So it took me a while to be willing to do things that I just had to kind of cross my fingers and hope that they would go well.
Is there a moment where that changed, or do you still kind of have to sort of look back and kind of grapple with that feeling of I'm being qualified? I'm not sure.
I think it's interesting that you ask, because when you say that, I think, I wonder whether some of the difficulty in writing a second book is that now you do have some evidence, right? You have some like, well, this book did well and people liked it and people tell me that they liked it. So you want to kind of go back and make sure that you're going to continue to get that. And so it's hard to go back to the place of just writing out of the idea that you're excited about it and you care about it. So it's hard to kind of get back your more unformed brain about writing, where you're just doing it because you don't have anything except the faith that you think you can do it. So I don't know if there was a particular place where that changed. I think around 2015, 2016 was a really kind of difficult time for me, just emotionally and mental health wise. It was kind of when I wound up getting on medication for depression, anxiety, which I'd had for a long time. And I think kind of having those things, I think both the fact that I was struggling a lot and the fact that I was finally kind of getting some help with those things made it a good time for me to sit down and do some creative work that kind of gave me something interesting to think about, and also sort of, gave my energy somewhere to go.
Has your writing process itself changed from Evvie to now, or do you still kind of start with the same, inkling of an idea? How do you start with a book, maybe?
Well, part of the thing is, Evvie really was a book that is about the progress of a relationship. It's about really just a couple of important personal relationships. So it didn't take a lot of planning and plotting. The book that I'm working on now took a little more planning. There are a few more pieces that you have to figure out exactly how they're going to fit together and fall into place. And so the process has been different just because, people ask a lot of times, do you outline? I didn't really outline on the first book. I've had to do a little bit more of that with this book, just by necessity. It's not a matter of like, I want my process to be different. It's just a different book. So, but I still am somebody who kind of like, honestly, I have to be a little bit in the right mood. It happens when it happens. And I sit down and I usually will write, I write in the evening or in the morning or on the weekend, because I'm still a person who has a regular job. So I write when I can. And there's kind of some planning and some flying by the seat of my pants, and then you just kind of hope you're gonna be able to kind of pull it all together at the end and make a whole out of it.
Going back to your law degree again, I'm just really curious because I feel like law itself is sort of you question things and you kind of examine things in the same kind of way you might analyze a show.
Mhm.
Has that sort of had that like background experience, or has that changed the way you write or changed the way that you think about shows as well?
For sure. I mean, I think, sometimes people ask, are you glad you went to law school? Do you regret that you went to law school? Law school is a great place to learn how to make solid arguments. And if you're going to be a critic, it's really important to figure out kind of, how do I want to construct an argument, and how do I want to answer other people's arguments? And how do I want to think logically in a way that's not going to just seem like it's me just venting about my opinion, which, I mean, obviously being a critic is always going to involve your opinion, but you also want to be able to assemble an argument and explain it to people. I use the writing experience and the argument experience that I got in law school all the time. And I think it did make me more rigorous about the way that I thought about things, trying to anticipate what's the counter argument to this, like what's the, what is the other person going to say about this argument? Because that happens all the time. If you're writing a brief in an appeal in appellate court, they're going to come back and they're going to have a counter argument, and you can either ignore it and wait for them to make it, or you can try to anticipate it and answer it, and that will force you to kind of make a stronger argument yourself. So for sure, it was good training for argument in general. Now, does that mean it was worth going to law school? That's a hard question. That's a hard question.
Also, like when you're in discussions with the other people on the podcast and all your co-hosts, does that help you maybe make a better argument against them if they have a conflicting opinion, or just like to kind of debate with each other, or does it like maybe help?
I don't think we do a ton of debating, and it's not because we never disagree. It's just because I think those are all people who understand that we like different things. But yes, I mean, in the situations where I feel like I have to defend a particular point of view, absolutely, sure. I think, anybody who's ever argued with lawyers who specialize in that kind of arguing aspect of it, which I kind of did because I did appellate work, will tell you that they will sort of, you have to, as a lawyer that's done appellate, you have to kind of like restrain yourself, or you find yourself trying to lawyer people all the time. And it's an instinct that I think I mostly am able to overcome, but not perfectly, I'm sure.
Also, because you brought on Aisha recently on the podcast, and I heard you had to do a search maybe from your past panelists and people in NPR. What was it like to kind of get that kind of new opinion and sort of mesh with the rest of the people?
One of the great things is, we had both, when we were looking for a fourth host for the show, we had people from NPR who were interested in potentially doing it. We had people who had been panelists on the show who were interested in potentially doing it. We had people who had never been on the show, who we didn't know at all, who were potentially interested in doing that. And we considered, people from kind of all of those categories. The only thing that I regret about that process is that we could not hire like a whole bunch of people, because, we have so many, for people who listen to the show, we have so many great and interesting panelists and voices, and I'm so grateful that they come and share their thoughts with us and trust us enough to kind of come and be part of the show. With Aisha, she was not just somebody that we'd worked with before, who had editing experience at the New York Times and podcasting experience at Slate and things like that. And just was somebody who was just is a delight to work with as a person, and has a wonderfully interesting range of things that she's passionate about. But, she's also somebody who, has a deep knowledge, particularly of film history, probably more than any of us do. So, she's able to bring a different kind of, a different kind of, almost, I don't want to say academic knowledge, but like a different base of reference for certain kinds of things. If you want to hear that, if you listen to our episode about the film Sylvie's Love, she talks quite a bit about Douglas Sirk movies and melodramas of the kind of mid-century melodramas. And she's really smart in talking about those things. And I'm just not an expert in those kinds of movies. So it's just been wonderful it's always wonderful to have, as many perspectives as possible, but having Aisha as part of our kind of core team has really improved the quality of the show and the quality of our conversations. And I just could not be more delighted.
Do you have a favorite moment from filming with everybody or like recording with everyone, and just kind of like, maybe, I don't know, something that feels like a moment where you really felt like it was, I don't know, like really happy or funny or silly, or I don't know.
I'll tell you one of my favorite experiences. One of my favorite experiences is that one of the people who is at NPR, who's been on the show quite a bit, less now because he's so busy, but Gene Demby, who's one of the hosts of Code Switch, has been on our podcast quite a bit. And we all consider him a dear pal. And when Hamilton was new and was on Broadway, Gene was very excited about Hamilton in the sense that he was listening to the cast album all the time. And he came and talked to us about the cast album. And so Jessica, our producer, and I got it in our minds that we wanted to go. And this was still when you could not get a ticket to that show. And so Jessica and I got it in our minds that we wanted to take the show to see Hamilton, and we wanted to take Gene as our fourth chair. And I think we got in touch with them in something like October, and they said, we can get you press tickets if you want to come in March. And so it was a long wait, but we got to go and we got to take everybody. And I sat next to Gene, and it's one of those things where I really love the episode that we did. And I really love the conversation that we had, but also just as a person who not only loved being able to see that show, obviously, but like I loved experiencing that with my friends from the show. It's a very, very dear and special memory that, again, like just incredibly blessed and lucky to be able to do that. That's before work. I mean, ridiculous. No one has that job. That's so cool and fun. And I'm so fortunate that I get to, do things like that with people that I dearly, dearly love as part of my job.
It sounds wonderful. I'm still like comprehending the fact that you went to Hamilton. I love Hamilton. So
man, it's sometimes I think about it and I think, yeah, we got to see pretty much the entire original cast. It was Renee Elise Goldsberry, who played Angelica, was out that night and had a substitute who was also wonderful. So I think sometimes about the fact that I got to experience that. And it's just such a special and fortunate job to have. And I try very hard to deserve it as much as I can.
Oh, I think you did an amazing job at it. I think that
thank you.
Just like the I don't know, the perspective that you bring to the podcast, it's wonderful.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's very kind.
I also have a question. It's kind of random. It's kind of out there.
Sure.
But on your Twitter, you post a lot about the New York Times spelling bee. And I would love to hear about your history with the spelling bee. Like, what got you into that? Like, why are you so invested into it? It's very interesting, but I love doing it myself. But you seem to be very into it.
So the spelling bee, for anybody who doesn't know what the spelling bee is, it's like a little ring of letters with a letter in the middle, and you just make words from all those letters. It's kind of like Boggle a little bit, except that you have to play, like the center letter has to be in all the words. And so I got into spelling bee because I followed so many people who played the spelling bee all the time. People like Benjamin Dreyer, who's a wonderful copy editor, who, by the way, has a wonderful book out called Dreyer's English that I recommend to anybody who's a writer or interested in writing. And he was super into the bee. There were some other people who were super into the bee. I follow a woman named Stacey Singleton, who somehow gets to Queen Bee all the time. And I don't know how she does it. Queen Bee is you get every letter, you get every word that's available. I love spelling bee, but it also makes me so angry because I get so frustrated because I can usually get to the high level, but I can't get every word. And it's just this. And it came from, I had also done the New York Times crossword for a long time, which I will sometimes still do. But the spelling bee is a little it's a little simpler. The crossword, you're looking at a lot of different things and whatever. Whereas with the spelling bee, you're just staring at that group of letters all day long, off and on, until the other day I was one word away from Queen Bee, and I just never got it. I just never got it. And sometimes I look at the final list of words and the ones that I missed and I say, you know what? I was never going to get it. I look at that group of words, that letters for a year, and I never would have gotten that word. So that's fine.
Oh, well, I mean, I like that. I like hearing the struggle. I mean, I did it myself, and it's just, yeah.
It's really like, it's very social. The difference between that and the crossword is that the crossword is up like permanently. You can always go back and do the crossword from like 2 days ago. And what that means is you can't really talk on Twitter about the answers to the crossword because it's not nice, right? But with the bee, you can only do the bee that day. It disappears. The bee's gone. There's no archive. So you can only do the bee that day, which means when you get up the next day, you can talk all about what was and wasn't a valid answer to the bee the previous day. And you can say, I can't believe they didn't accept blah, 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 but they took rat-a-tat. Was that a real word? I don't know if I think that's a real word. And you can go back and forth with people because it's only there for the day. So you can, quote unquote, spoil the bee as much as you want.
Also on your Twitter, it's just such a dynamic Twitter feed. Your dog goes to doggy daycare a lot. Yeah. And I'd love to hear maybe a story from that. Like, why do you put him in doggy daycare?
So my dog is very social. He loves other dogs. And I am not a person who has the kind of wherewithal to own a group of dogs. I can really only own one dog. He's a sort of a in the greyhound family. I don't think we know exactly what the makeup of him is, but he's like greyhoundy, whippety kind of little skinny, fast dog. And mostly he wants to lie around because mostly he's very lazy, but occasionally he wants to wear himself out. So he really needs to go and be with other dogs in order to do that. So I take him to daycare, typically 2 or 3 days a week. He goes to daycare. He plays all day. He comes home. He's exhausted. I give him something to chew on. He gives his little chew a few chews, and he just right in his dog bed. And they send me pictures every day. His daycare, which is District Dogs in DC. They send adorable daycare pictures of him playing with all his friends. It's always one of the highlights of my day when they send the pictures at the end of the day.
Yeah. That sounds adorable. I love dogs. I have one as well.
He's just the best. What kind do you have?
She's a corgi mix.
Oh, they're the best. There's a corgi at Brian's daycare, and whenever I post pictures from the daycare, there's a certain group of people who are always looking to see if they can see the corgi because the corgi is so cute. Aww. And there was because Brian's like I said, a greyhoundy type dog, so he has these super long, really skinny legs. And there was one that I posted the other day where Brian was standing next to this corgi, and several people said it looked like he was looking at the corgi being like, why are your legs so short? Because the bodies of the dogs are kind of similar, but he's way up here and the corgi's way down here because the corgi's legs are that long. It was very funny. It's very funny. People love corgis, including me.
I love how hearing about you interact with people on Twitter too. It just feels like I don't know, you sound like such a people person, because I also the Pop Culture Happy Hour podcast is very much directly in kind of people's ears. Has always been how you've been kind of interacting with people and being really dynamic, or has that changed?
No, I'm actually and this is still true of me. If I go to a party where I don't know anyone, I will stand against a wall the entire time and wait there, and if anyone talks to me, that's fine, and if not, I will if it's a podcasting event or a work event or something, I will go find a corner to stand in because I'm just very uncomfortable in that kind of situation. I think Twitter for being kind of social works well for me because I am a nervous person in person, and because I am uncomfortable in crowds, so it's a way to be around a lot of people without being in a physical crowd. But no, I've never been a particularly dynamic or charismatic person. I've just been somebody who was heavily reliant on my friends who I loved the most.
Oh, that's still really sweet to hear. And I mean, I relate to that too. I'm always a wallflower, so.
And people are just super it's just very nice to talk on Twitter, particularly during the pandemic. It's been really helpful to me because I live alone. So, chatting with people every day about my dog or my vaccine rash or whatever. It's just a way of kind of feeling the feeling of having company about small things, having sort of a place to bounce around your small ideas.
Mm-hmm. How has your work routine actually changed for the pandemic, or maybe like just like life in general? How has that been?
I mean, I think, some of it is the same stuff that a lot of other people who have been lucky enough to be able to stay home have experienced. I don't really see people in person. I get most things delivered, so I don't go shopping. So some of it is that kind of stuff. In terms of work, we did used to tape everything in the studio. And I think, people at NPR were a little bit nervous at first about whether people could get used to recording from home. But now we do. And everybody's got their own little, you hang blankets on a hanger so you can get a little bit of sound dampening or whatever. I miss seeing everybody, but we have video meetings every day, which I know a lot of people don't like having video meetings every day, but for me, it's a chance to kind of check in with all these people who I'm close to. And so, yeah, I mean, we have our meetings online and we tape remotely. It looks just like this. I'll be on Zoom with all the people who are on the episode so that we can all see each other. And, it's not ideal. I miss our studios, but we've made it work. And the producers adjusted and learned how to do a bunch of new things and learned how to set people, like when we have a new panelist, set them up with all the stuff that they need and make sure they can get their audio recorded. And our panelists have been really great about, learning a new skill of kind of tracking yourself at home. And we've managed to make it work.
Yeah, that sounds nice, actually. I feel like in some ways it's almost more manageable, I guess, after you get used to it.
I mean, it cuts out the commute part of the day. It cuts out the chaos of sort of being around in an office with a lot of other people. I think when I go back to the office, which, on the whole, I will be very happy to do. But when I go back, I think there will be an adjustment period just in terms of being around so many people all the time. And I think everybody will have to spend a little bit of, again, people who have been lucky enough to be able to be isolating during all of this and staying safe themselves. I think all those people will have an adjustment period probably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. One of the ways I feel like that people have been adjusting during the pandemic is maybe like watching more TV at home or just kind of consuming more media to kind of almost escape right now.
Yeah.
Have you seen yourself been doing that too, or is it different for you since you do watch stuff for your job?
I mean, it's a little bit different in the sense that I've always watched a lot of stuff at home. But it is true that I have always loved kind of haunting movie theaters and being able to go out and be in movie theaters and also see live theater. After that trip to Hamilton, we did some other trips to see theater. Those things I miss enormously. And the fact that those things are not available and, more and more and more of being at home is available is something of a bummer. But I will say, as we go into this year's Oscars, one of the things that we've talked about quite a bit is that, these films that are nominated for Oscars, more of them are much more available to more people than is usually the case, in the sense that for a lot of people, the movies that were nominated for Oscars, particularly in categories like international films and animated films and short films, they didn't have access to them. They couldn't see them. They didn't come to their town. They didn't come to an art house theater because there isn't one. So there's an upside and a downside. Now people have been able to attend virtual film festivals who never could have gone to a physical film festival for reasons from geography to disability to other things. And, hopefully some of that can be kept without losing elements of in-person interaction that are also valuable and wonderful. So,
yeah, I guess the inclusivity part is actually almost increased in some ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious. I feel like some people have been using media to escape during the pandemic as well. And when you're consuming media at home, do you find yourself like gravitating towards media that you watched before, maybe nostalgic wise, or just, I don't know. I've also seen recently on your Twitter feed, I keep going back to that, but you've been watching the new Law and Order sort of.
Yeah, it's funny. Like there are certain things that I have always kind of just watched for almost like background noise. One of which was like Law and Order shows, but, particularly in light of, some of the really good reporting and conversations last summer about police violence and the representations of the police in media, I kind of stepped away from all police stuff on television for probably from about last May to a couple weeks ago. And because there was a new Law and Order organized crime show that was going to be on, I kind of went back, to it, and I sort of reacquainted myself with that franchise. But I don't tend to go as much for that stuff. But there are always things like I've watched. It's not really comfort viewing. It's just things that I think are good. Like I've watched. I think I've watched all of Succession 2 more times during the pandemic, just because I think it's good and entertaining in its own sort of dark and curious way. There are a couple of things I managed to catch up with that I had just never caught up with before. The Leftovers is one. I just started Homicide: Life on the Street, which you have to watch on DVD because it's not streaming anywhere. So yeah, I try to find things that are interesting, but it's a mix of exploring and going back to the familiar.
Also, you've had quite the career so far, and I always like to ask people that are like very sort of accomplished in my eyes. I'm very young, so everybody seems very accomplished to me in some way.
Sure, of course.
But I'm curious, do you define success in a specific way to yourself, or when you're dealing with your career and just sort of like looking back on it?
What a great question. I think, one of the office jobs that I had in the past, like long before NPR, I made a promise to myself that I would try to never have a job again where I cried a lot. And I think it was a recognition that if you're spending 8 hours a day, 5 days a week on something, endeavor to have it be something that you can get something out of, if you possibly can, right? And it's a, as I said before, absurd privilege to be able to enjoy your work as much as I do. That's a stroke of luck in so many ways. But for me, being successful is being able to do things that I really care about. Do things, use whatever success comes from that to help other people to be successful. Because if you never use the momentum and the energy that you gain in your own career for anyone's benefit except yourself, then there's kind of no point in doing it, in my opinion. And then obviously like the independence that comes from being able to make money doing things that you love, so that you can live as you want within reason, and go on vacation and buy a house. That's a lot of success for me, particularly given, like I said, that I get to do something that I really, really care about, and where I feel like I can do things for other people's careers as well.
Yeah, that sounds really lovely. It's such a privilege, as you said, to like enjoy something that much. And I get that you kind of have to balance it too with having the necessities of life as well.
Yeah. It's important to me. I think journalists in general, are grappling with the fact that you can love what you do and you can value what you do, but there's still nothing wrong with wanting to make enough money to live and have comforts, and send your kids to college if you have them, or send your dog to daycare or whatever. Everybody needs to be able to make a living, even if they're doing things that are a public service.
That's a lovely sentiment.
I think we probably should go ahead and wrap up. That was a really great closer. Anyway, as soon as you asked that question, I went, that would be a really good place to wrap up. I couldn't sit here and listen.
Good job. You've got the touch. You know how to find the natural out point.
Very good at this. That was a great interview. So I'm just going to do some real quick closing remarks. Obviously, a big thank you to everyone who's able to view this from the comfort of their own home. Thank you to Neha for conducting another amazing interview. It was wonderful. I love being able to be a part of this and watch you do such great work. But of course, to Linda, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today, for being a part of, obviously, this great interview. Really wonderful answers. I will admit I'm not an NPR fanatic, but Neha might have just created another convert.
Oh, nice.
So
Appreciate
I
it.
headed that direction.
Of course. And by the way, Neha, if you're ever in DC and you want to come walk around NPR once it's open again, make sure you reach out. I'll walk you all around the building. Big satellite dishes, little studios.
Thank you so much. It was so lovely to talk to you.
Of course. It was lovely to talk to you too.
I really love your work. I'm genuinely such a big fan.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, you two were wonderful and awesome, and this was really great. To everyone watching, I hope you've enjoyed this session, and I really hope that you get to check out some other LitUp 2021. Wow, I've never struggled that hard to say that, but here we are. We've got a lot of other great stuff going on. So yeah, check all that out. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.